So Dino, what is blockchain maturity, and how did you kind of get involved with this subject?
Thank you, Gerard. Thank you also for the title, very, very inspiring. So I alluded to a little bit the background of my experience in the blockchain domain. In 2017, I became the CIO of the United Nations Joint Staff Pension Fund. And one of the first assignment that I was given was about to automate the only process that within the United Nations system had never been automated. And this was the process by which the beneficiaries and retirees of the United Nations pension need to confirm that they are still alive. And this is for the United Nations a unique issue because contrary to a national pension fund that has access to registry of mortality, the UN is dealing with 80,000 individuals that are located in more than 190 countries around the world. And therefore, access to certain information to validate and confirm is not always possible. Therefore, for over 70 years, the UN has conducted this proof of verification of existence through a paper form that's mailed once a year through more than 190 postal services, sent to the beneficiary. They are asked to sign that piece of paper and return it back. As you can appreciate, that kind of process is often subject to delays and, of course, also to a lot of questioning related to potential fraud, questioning to the potential forging of signature and so forth and so on. So the pension fund was often asked to prove a negative, which of course is impossible. How can you prove that there is no fraud? So because of my background in IT auditing, my approach was, well, rather than addressing this from a point of view of a negative, let's try to address this from a point of view of a positive. How can positively demonstrate that someone indeed is the person that claims to be? So I designed this solution that uses biometrics, facial recognition, and blockchain to record each of these transactions that occur in the life cycle of this process. This application has been offered on a voluntary basis. As of today, it went live in January 2021. We have already approximately 20% of our user base that have adopted. And recently, and I will go into the details tomorrow during my presentation in the afternoon, we also received, for us, a very important recognition. The Secretary General of the United Nations gave us an award for innovation and sustainability. With all that said, everything looks good. However, coming from auditing, one of my biggest issues from the beginning, and I shared some of these elements before, was how can I prove to the governing bodies of the United Nations, to the General Assembly, to the oversight bodies of the United Nations, to the stakeholder in the community at large, how can I prove that indeed that this solution is reliable? How can I give assurance? And that's where, as I alluded to before, I got in touch with the highest organization. I started to look at the Institute of Internal Auditors, ISAC, and so forth and so on, but couldn't find something very specific. And this is when I met Gerard. I became more familiar with the activity of the GBA to the extent that I actually became involved in the development of the blockchain maturity model, which now I'm trying to use not just for my application, but across the UN system, because the funny thing that happened within my environment is all of a sudden the system realized that a digital identity mechanism was put in place at the time when people are leaving the organization, the pension fund. So the natural question is, why don't we build a digital identity when people get actually hired? So that when they move across the system from one organization to another, they can use a digital wallet, digital identity. So now we are spearheading this much bigger project, and I hope to be used the BMM as a benchmark, as criteria that generally accepted to provide reliance and assurance on the solution. Thank you.
And one more point, in addition to that, Dino is also the lead for the United Nations Digital Transformation Working Group, which essentially coordinates the activities of the CIOs across all the UN programs, including the World Food Program, the World Health Organization. And in October, he's convening a meeting, and I guess you're going to be sharing the VMM across the entire United Nations footprint. So there are folks at National Science Foundation, NIST, a number of other places where we're having these kind of conversations, because we really think, and again, it's not about us developing the standard, it's about there should be a standard that people can use for the benefit of the industry. Torben, what is blockchain maturity to you, and why'd you get involved?
Yeah, thanks, Gerard. I want to build on Dino's point around benchmarking, which has been so critical. We're coming from a different perspective and working with clients and customers and how we actually make sure that people get the right thing in place. There's so much noise out there. There's so many blockchains. There's so many, so much bad press. So we really need to set a benchmark. But even as part of that, maybe just as a side story, blockchain is a lot more infrastructural than people realize. Meaning that we sometimes talk about Web 3, but we already know people are doing the Web 5 thing, etc. Right? And there'll be Web X, Web onwards. But I think that blockchain is much more akin to an infrastructure like an Internet 2.0, because we have to get it right, but we also have to remain flexible. And as innovators, we have to make sure that when we step in early to a technology like blockchain, that we have a way of continuing to innovate, because those first couple of steps are kind of hard. And so when we were meeting with clients, what we found a lot happening was they didn't know which blockchain to choose. And that's if they're starting out. If they already have a blockchain, they have no idea whether they got the right one and what standard it is actually setting. And so blockchain maturity model is about benchmarking, as Dino said, but it's also about helping clients and people and enterprises and governments and everyone to actually go on a journey. Because it's okay to say, well, my maturity is X, but when I want to go X plus 1, that takes me on the next journey. And so it's actually about helping to take a journey in blockchain, making sure you're also flexible. We're finding that blockchains provide different features and functions. So we find it very helpful to explain to people that they should avoid being vendor locked, being actually locked into one chain, or don't chain yourself to one chain. But anyway, all of that to say that knowing the level of your blockchain is okay no matter what level you're at, but at least you know where you're at and you can start to build on that. And so for us, it's really exciting to be able to set a benchmark for our clients, to set a benchmark within government and within organizations, so that we actually have a way forward and a good foundation to build on. Yeah.
Thank you, Torben. Dr. Jeannice?
Hi, I'm Jeannice Samani, and thank you, Gerard, so much for the invitation to come today. He and I, as he alluded to, we were on a panel together at Select USA, and I was enamored by what I was hearing. I immediately joined GBA. And we had a long conversation. It's quite exciting to be here to talk about blockchain, as I see it as a trusting factor. I see it as an opportunity by which there could be level setting around the world. There could be opportunities. I believe in blockchain for all. And it's a great opportunity to think about it from the standpoint of the BMM as being that guide, that ethical compass, if you will, to make sure that the companies, organizations, individuals are utilizing blockchain in such a way that could actually benefit not only themselves, but actually benefit their community, benefit their nation state, and benefit the globe, if you will.
Thank you very much. Alejandro, so what is blockchain maturity and why'd you get involved?
Hi all, I'm Alejandro Mandujano. My major and specialization is on data centers and infrastructure, mainly on banks. And one of our clients asked us one time if we know something that can protect them and give them certainty of their operations. Even though they were based in Germany, all the operations were done in Mexico. And there was no certainty. And I started just investigating, and I bumped with Gerard in a chat and start talking about the blockchain, and it happens to me the same as Jeannice. I cannot say I got in love because Katie's over there, but we start talking about the standards and BMM, and you guys take for granted what the infrastructure means. When you ask about 99.995% of online operation, it's a great thing. Only the big banks can do it, or the Amazons or such type of companies. That requires a lot of effort, and they're getting involved lots of standards from every part. And when I started talking about the BMM, I understood that that was the part missing that we have. But in order to get into the BMM and comprehend it, you have to have a background of methodology, because most of the companies keep on hiring engineers and developers, and they just have different bases. And whenever you try to develop a new application, everyone has a different way of, if I can say, designing, but no one likes to document. They hate documentation. And when you ask them to document, that comes the chaos. And one of the very best important, the most important things of the BMM is that you have to have clear documentation. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have it, well, you cannot be assigning any ratification when you're rating. So those things, and now that I start translating it into Spanish, I got that we have 11 elements, and there are 3 that are cross-functional. And those are compliance, security, and privacy. And I know that there are lots of auditors here, but I think that compliance is absorbing auditing. And the lawyers are going to be happy but they don't understand also what compliance means in BMM. They need to understand how things are done. We need to first start translating a 200-page agreement into code. And if we don't, the lawyer doesn't know anything of computer programming, and the engineer doesn't know anything about laws, they're not going to communicate. So we started in our committee in Mexico. We have one lawyer, which is Claudia Fierro, and we started doing an agreement and diagramming it, an easy one, a leasing agreement. And it took us 2 feet long of diagramming in order to include all different things. So if we don't start bettering up all the areas, then we're not going to get a full compliance of the BMM.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. And I want to warn the panel and let you guys know, I have a history of just throwing people under the bus. So I've emailed all of them the questions that I'm going to ask, and I'm not going to ask them any of them, okay? So for those of you who know me, I'll just randomly pick people, bring them up on stage, and so, don't make direct eye contact with me. I will. But Alejandro makes a really good point. When we do an assessment, there has to be at least 4 people on the assessment team, and they have to have 4 different competencies, right? One has to be a technology competency, the other one has to be a domain competency, the third one has to be a digital asset management competency, and the fourth one has to be a legal regulatory compliance competency. So when we do an assessment, the elements essentially are different perspectives or views at the solution. Right, so we look at the solution from the perspective of privacy, of resilience, and so we look at it, think of an object and light's shining on it from many different directions to get a full understanding of the thing. So the assessments do require that level of scrutiny. But I would like to ask the next question, which you're totally unprepared for. As we have been talking about this for the last 2 years, or however many parts of that you were involved. And we've been talking with companies and looking at essentially assessing other companies formally and informally. What is an epiphany? What is one or two takeaways that you've learned, right, that you've discovered kind of going through this process? And Dino, I'll start with you and we'll walk down.
Thank you, Gerard. So I think one of the most critical elements that emerged as we were looking at the various parts of the model itself is that ultimately it can be technologically agnostic. It can be built on the basis of controls that are independent from the specific platform that you're going to use. And therefore, there is a model, there is an approach, there are criteria that definitely should be tested and see whether they are valid, but they can help an organization really to have a framework of reference and understand that ultimately we're talking about a system. So there is no technology that exists in isolation. And the moment that you acquire technology or you decide to use a technology to develop something, you need to make that interrelationship with the governance, with the security, with the identity, with the privacy, with the infrastructure, and so forth and so on. So I think that the beauty, the value added of the model is that did not rely on any specific technology, but really it's process-based and control-based. So that's, for me, the most important aspect.
You know, as we were meeting, you know, week after week after week, we would take one of these requirements or elements, and we say, hey, will this work with Bitcoin? Will it work with Hyperledger? Will it work with IOTA? No, it won't work with, darn, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. And the reason it took us 2 years to come up with the requirements for 11 elements is because it was just that hard to find characteristics that were specific enough that they had value, right, but generic enough that they had applicability across technologies. It was a tough nut to crack, but these guys have done it. So, Torben, what's an epiphany for you?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of what you're saying, Gerard. It's like realizing the specific criteria that had to be chosen for BMM wasn't easy. But in doing so, learning a ton about what do different blockchains bring, and that there is actually enough out there to actually test. You know, so even going into doing these assessments now, we've got a great opportunity to actually help even those networks themselves innovate, saying by setting these standards, because hey, this is a critical criteria. If this network isn't providing that, then maybe that's something that they want to start innovating towards. And you know, if you don't have this criteria, this isn't good enough for say a government DoD, for example, application. So we're really and also we're going into specialist areas, aren't we? Into financial services and other areas. So that means that it starts becoming domain specific, which is super cool, because then we're actually starting to say, hey, a blockchain provides special features for a particular industry. And that's okay, because why? Blockchains will have different feature sets. I mean, we worked with clients that the only reason they wanted to connect to Ethereum was for liquidity. Like, that was the only reason. Now, I'm sure there's other reasons, but that, in this particular case, that's what they did. So I think it will start for us to help us really understand the landscape and where we can really get the value, not just from blockchain generally, but from certain chains that offer different value.
My epiphany was, again, I will go back to my initial statement. We're a data transformation company for our Samani group. And what I was finding was we were gathering massive big data banks, if you will, and storage and ETL and sending it up to the cloud. But there was that sense of what do we do with it and where do we go from here? For many of our clients, there was trust factors, there were partitioning factors. So the beauty of BMM is the validation. So you can use that validation across all domains. And what I have found is that I see it as a two-tier checklist. So you have the generic or the initiation, if you will, of blockchain and BMM. And then you have the domain specific, as you were alluding to, where we really want to hone in on what that data is going to be used for, who it's being used for, who the client is, and what you want the outcome to be, because we know that all data is not good data. So that validation factor is a really key part of BMM.
Well, I think that for me, one of the most important things of the VMM is that if you're a consultant or an officer of a company, you need to understand, after understanding well the domain and get to the specific requirements of that domain, then you have to adjust all the different things that you have in your company. Because depending on the way the designs are just built and intertwined, of the different elements, you can have a better understanding that everything is matched, it was considered, and everything was well planned. If not, it's a good time to just to recognize which things or which areas you have to work with more, just make them clear so that you can keep on working on them, and then just go to JBA and GBA and ask them for a study of the VMM.
So in true fashion, like I said, I'm going to surprise people. Paul, I'm going to ask you to make your way to the stage because I'm going to ask you a question here in a second. Because what they've all done is talk about some specialization. Paul is leading the charge on the banking financial services supplement to the GBA. But just come over here. I'm going to say just a couple of things, and then I'll turn the mic over to you. I'll tell you my two epiphanies. As we were looking at all these companies that said that they had a blockchain, it's immutable, this is the value of blockchain, and we're bringing it, right? We identified two things, and this doesn't have to be true. These were for permissioned blockchains. We found different problems with permissioned blockchains and public blockchains. But with the permissioned blockchains, what we found is in every case that we looked at, all the nodes were on a single cloud server. That means that cloud server can turn it off. Well, how immutable is your blockchain if you've got one person who can hit the off switch? Tomorrow, I think tomorrow we're going to hear from George Farmer. For those of you who don't know, George Farmer is the CIO for a company called Parler, right? So during the 2020 election, you might have remembered there was some controversy during that election. You probably saw that on the news, right? Anyway, so as you guys may know, I think Twitter and Facebook delisted the Trump organization or Trump-affiliated groups. They then moved to another social media called Parler, right? And then instead of getting essentially delisted by the platform, they got delisted by the cloud provider. So the cloud provider said, you know what? We don't like what you're doing. We're turning the switch off. And so they're going to be talking tomorrow on a panel called censorship-resistant communication, right? So that's going to be great. But what we realized two things. Number one, they weren't immutable. The other thing is that they're all under the control of a single CTO. So that CTO could come in one morning, change the software on those nodes hosted on the cloud provider, and nobody would know. Well, how immutable is that? Right? All of the things we talk about blockchain, they were all claiming. They said we have a distributed ledger. They would even claim decentralization. When we peeled the onion back, we realized it was 90% of the folks claiming all these things. This wasn't true. And the blockchain maturity model is what illuminated that because it gave us criteria to ask the right questions. The other thing that we saw is that what most people did was they had a great idea. They put together a pitch deck. They went and they got funding. They hired some code jockeys to start banging some code out, and they had no infrastructure. So if a critical person would leave, then the project was shot. Well, if you're a government organization, is that where you want to put your money, right? So the blockchain maturity model assesses solutions at 5 levels, right? Is it mature enough for research and development funding? Is it mature enough for proof of concept? Is it mature enough to go into a production environment? Is it mature enough for enterprise rollout? And is it mature enough for a global rollout? So across these 11 elements, you can look at it at those different stages, right? But one of the things that we noticed is that, and I'm going to give you like 2 minutes. Right, no, there is. But I just want to give I know you have a great answer to that question too. What did you learn? And I wish we had time for that. But one of the things we learned is that different use cases have very different requirements. So identity management, as an example, if you're doing banking, you need to do AML, KYC, right? But if you're doing voting, you have to have permanent separability between the voter and the vote. If you're doing healthcare, you need to know that the patient came from data ABC123. You just can't know who they are, right? So as we were looking at this, we said we need to come up with supplemental requirements, and Paul is leading the one for bank and finance. So would you mind just talking a little bit about the supplemental requirement? We got about 2 minutes, and then we got to wrap up.
So I was articulated. The BMM is, and Gerard articulated this, was trying to be objective and allow for public blockchains, permission blockchains, all the potential elements that you want to assess just on a generic basis. And then they're assessed at 5 levels, and it's important to emphasize that the 5 levels aren't bad to worse. It's just where are you in the maturity spectrum, and it's a collaborative review to ensure that you know where you're going as far as maturity. When it comes to domain specifics, and we were looking at banking and finance, then there's a supplemental set of requirements. So what we went through the process of doing is defining delineation of use cases, because the financial services covers a host of different use cases. Where it was worthy enough to single them out, try and aggregate some or separate others, so those became use cases. And then we listed across a matrix of all the requirements that we thought possibly could apply to those use cases. And we just prepared a preliminary matrix to say, against these use cases, these requirements are required, optional, or not applicable. And again, that's just the first cut. So slightly different than where the assessment, the BMM, is on 5 levels. The supplemental is just, does it apply, does it not apply, and do you meet the requirement? But again, it's not supposed to be pass-fail. It's supposed to be, this is important. If it's important, you need to have done it. If you don't have it, then there's a sort of collaborative discussion on then how do you rectify that situation. But so I don't think we've got it published, but it's on the GBA website. If you look at the banking financing group, the supplement is there, and we've also used that as the model. I'm a lay person when it comes to the voting working group. I'm just there to learn, but they're developing their supplemental requirement. I believe there's others in the healthcare group. So this is the format. So where if you've got a use case in a specific domain, then this is something that can help you with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we're out of time. We have copies of the blockchain maturity model. They've got them at the check-in desk. I've got a whole bunch right there on the table. If you don't have a copy, you should definitely pick it up. You should read it tonight. You put it under your pillow, learn it. If you want to get involved, we are doing a class this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. It's virtual. Go to the GBA site under events, and you can get to it. And then in October 10th, 11th, and 12th, we're doing another virtual class. So by all means, please check it out. We would love you guys to get involved. If you're interested in getting assessed, awesome. If you want to become a consultant, an appraiser, it's a great revenue opportunity for you as well. So I'd like to thank the panel. I can't thank you not just for today, but for your tireless efforts over a long period of time. You have been an incredible asset to the community. So thank you very much. All right.
Thanks. Pleasure to meet you in person.